In exploring the various waves of shame associated with a relationship with Lazaris, it's useful to understand that one aspect of shame is exclusion, and that exclusion has different levels of shame based on inner age. The younger we are psychologically, as well as physiologically, meaning if you're 2 years old physiologically, you are 2 years old psychologically. But even if you're 40 or 50 years old physiologically, you can be 1 or 2 year old psychologically. Now, the younger the biological or physiological age, the more dependency we have on the giants around us. A 2-year-old complete and utter dependence on whoever is in proximity, because a 2-year-old cannot defend themselves and they cannot meet their own needs, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, you name it. It is a completely dependent relationship. And one of the functions of shame is to serve as a guide, a guideline that says we're getting out of bounds, we're not getting out of bounds, we're conforming, we're deviating from the path. And the path is, of course, defined by the predominant cult. So thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being like the majority, right? Often with very little intelligence or reference to anything other than the fact that everyone's doing that, right? Which is what makes cult the appropriate root word for culture. Is we do it because we do it, and that's why we do it. And all that matters is not, is this intelligence or, where did this come from? It's just that's the way things are done, so do it, right? And that is the path, right? The cult protocol. Well, as a 2-year-old, if we deviate from the path, it means death, because then we don't belong and we're in a completely dependent relationship. In relationships where the power asymmetry is great, there's a similar dynamic, right? If one person is the provider and provides for survival and security and love and belonging, and the other person is a recipient, and you're a recipient until you can meet those needs for yourself. Right? If you can survive on your own, but you don't feel secure on your own, you have no competence in loving yourself as an individual, and somebody provides security and gives you a sense of love and belonging, well, then you're in a dependent relationship. And so in a dependent relationship, the cue is deviation. Right? Because in an independent relationship, you can go your own way. But in a dependent relationship, right, if the only reason that you're there is that you conform and are attractive or whatever the recipe is, then if you cease to be attractive or cease to conform, then they go their own way, and that they're fine because they're in an independent dynamic within the relationship. But you can't go your own way because you don't have the skill, the competence, or the confidence to survive, to feel secure, to meet one's need for love and belonging, right? And so shame is telling us that we're no longer conforming. We're deviating from the norm, and we may not be able to survive. Now, that shame and the anxiety, even the trauma, right? The trauma of separation is highest in an insecure relationship of dependence. It's like, oh my gosh, Did I say hello? Did I not say hello? They could kill me. Should I do this? Should I do that? And that is the natural response of someone in an insecure, dependent relationship. And so this is part of shame, and as such, it has a useful function. Meaning, if all that you have to do in order to survive and be secure and meet one's sense of love and belonging is to agree with, whoever has the power in that relationship. You conform, you agree, you dress the same way they dress, you put on clothes, you don't do that, or you do this, or you do that at the party, you have a swig, right? If that's all you have to do to belong, right, and then you get your needs met, then you do need some kind of an alert to say, get real here. You're in a dependent, insecure relationship that's fragile, and you better not, admit to doing things, to thinking things, to feeling things that are outside of your cult. Right, and so that's kind of its function. But it also means that to deviate, feels different levels of, trauma is an experience where one's survival is threatened. And so you have mental trauma where your sense of sanity is threatened, emotional trauma where your sense of dignity and value is threatened. You have physical trauma where your life is threatened. You have financial trauma where your sense of financial identity, your pattern, is threatened. You have sexual trauma where your sense of sexual identity is traumatized. Also where your sexual identity is violated, where you have it may not survive, or it's just violated. I can't maintain my own sense of pattern because a larger force is engaging with me in a way that disrespects that pattern, and my pattern is the one that collapses. Their pattern is the one that continues, right? So in asymmetrical relationships, can be a sense of shame around the trauma, around the message that I don't matter. Because I is the ego that identifies, that attaches to a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. I identify with the pattern. That's me. Who's me? The one that did that, the one that said that, the one that looks like that, the one that feels that. Right? That's me. How do I know it's me? Well, I do it all the time. It's a pattern. Right? So that's me. I recognize, because I did it before, now I did it again. It is a pattern, and it's my pattern. I identify with it, right? And so it is the ego that feels shame, right? And so the ego feels shame when the pattern is threatened in a dependent relationship, but the ego also feels shame when the pattern is violated, right? Because the sense is that the pattern that I've attached to is secondary to other people, to the world, to God got us all that is, to something bigger than me. The pattern that I say is, that's me, that's my belief. If there's no one there to say that's mine, it's just a belief, a thought, a whatever, right? But the ego is the one that says, that's me. That's me right there. And so if that pattern, that belief, that thought, that feeling, that attitude, if that's humiliated, dishonored, it's not respected, it's not seen and moved around, it's seen and obliterated, it's seen and plowed through, it's seen and humiliated, well, then you have a dynamic where the I feels traumatized because it couldn't hold its pattern in the presence of that pattern, that other pattern. right? It's the phenomena of the pinball and the bowling ball, right? So there's shame when our pattern is broken. There's shame when our pattern is dishonored. To honor something is to move around it, to be different because of it. You go to another country and they say, please bow and, don't wear a hat or something. And you say, well, what a dumb country, right? Superstitious bullshit. I'm not going to take off my hat for these bozos, right? So that attitude shames anyone who believes in that dynamic. And if that person has not met their own needs yet and feels in a dependent relationship with their culture, where basically their prayer is, I will do what I'm told in my cult. And then the gods and the cult members and the higher-ups in the cult, they will reward me. They will let me stay in the cult. They'll fight for me. They'll give me a job, etc. And I need to be a good person or I'm not going to survive. And a good person follows the line, follows the cult, right? And so you deviate from that, and you're no longer a good person. You no longer belong. You're not part of the herd. You don't fit, you don't cohese with the larger pattern. And so in that dynamic, there is a sense of shame to the degree that we are dependent, right? And there's a degree of trauma to the degree that we are insecure, right? So this is the territory of shame, and it's not a bad move, right? It's not a bad move if you're gay and you realize that you're gay, by age 10, and you have dogmatic fundamentalist parents of some form or another that would rather kill you than admit that there was a gay person in your house. Well, it's not a bad move to hide, to have a secret shame, right? I know that if this were known, I would be excluded. And it is a traumatic possibility because at age 10, I don't yet have the skill to meet my needs for survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem. I'm looking to others to do that. I'm traumatized enough that I'm frightened of the unknown. And so I feel traumatized by going out and just meeting strangers because they're unknown. And I feel traumatized at the idea that I do know exactly how my parents would react to me. And, whether they put me in an institution or started, a brainwashing campaign or, took me out in the backyard and shot me or, put me up for adoption. Either way, these would all shatter my pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that I'm familiar with, that I've associate with my family. And so I just don't want to, I don't do that. And so there's a crisis looming that I'm not big enough to survive, right? I've got to keep this a secret until I have enough skill that I can transcend, that I can leave the cult, leave the system, and find hopefully my people, right? The people that won't kill you, ostracize you, shame you for, being the way you are. And so that's a territory of shame that, I think is useful, right? And if we think of the shame of doing as being doing that thing, which differentiates us from the herd, whether it's mom, whether it's the family, whether it's the community, whether it's the church, whether it's the country, whether it's the culture, right? No, I'm a vegetarian, thank you, but I'm a vegetarian, right? That's like, will they accept me, right? And if we're too insecure, that cannot be spoken, right? So we pretend to be part of the herd, the majority, until we can meet those needs. So, so what are the sources? What's in that context? What are some of the ways that Lazaris and shame have interacted for me? Well, as a 12, 13-year-old discovering Lazaris, I'm part of the cult of Christianity, right? And so anyone basically born in, the United States in my generation, I'm part of that cult, meaning that's the reference for the deity in school and in various observances. So it's clear that the power structure is revolving around that cult, and the deity is the presumed ultimate power, right? So Lazaris is a deviation from the deity, right? Through me you shall come into, or follow this, or whoever does this in my name, not Lazaris's name, in my name, right? So as a 12, 13-year-old, there is an awareness, listening to my first few tapes, that there's a deciding point, and that this way takes me off into the unknown, and this way takes me, keeps me in with the majority, in with the cult, right? And maybe a different cult that is the cult of, Lazaris and concept synergy, but it's a much smaller cult, right? And so to the degree that we are insecure, right, in the sociopathic operating system of fight, flight, freeze, of dominance, right, of domination and submission, in the sociopathic paradigm, which is the domain of the reptilian brain, which is fed by traumatic events, right? Blood, energy, attention goes to the reptilian brain when there are sociopathic communications and stimuli in the environment, and goes to other brains with other operating systems when, there are acts like an act of kindness may trigger the reptilian brain for a highly traumatized person because kindness is unknown. And that's the worst thing of all, right? You don't trust the unknown. And this is clear. What are they up to? People that have an identity that is a highly traumatized identity formed around a highly traumatizing series of events will see anything different as being more threatening, even if it's, quote, better, just because it's different and the fundamental operating system is one of distrust, then, it's fearful. But, as you move from one cult to another, one operating system, to another, you're usually a quack in, that's what the cult will call you if you're a religion of one, a belief system of one. Who cares about you? Now, if you believe even more absurd things, but you're part of a few million people, you are respected because of the law of mass. The law of mass says that when a bowling ball collides with a pinball, you don't have to wonder which one is going to change course. What's the outcome of a pinball and a bowling ball, right? They come along, the pinball goes flying, the bowling ball continues, right? That's how those two interact, right? The larger the mass, the more of the pattern has been reinforced by a larger, so if you have a large mass resonating at a dense pattern and you have a small mass resonating at a dense pattern, they collide, the larger one always wins if you're looking at it from a pattern coherence point of view, right? The pinball was going along here, the bowling ball was going along here, they collide, and the pinball goes off here, the bowling ball continues, right? So the most stable identity, the most certainty comes from being part of the majority. Now, as you get out in the weeds, into the minorities, right, you get into more and more fragile, when you start going into the ephemeral terrain of, I just had an inspiration, an idea for something I've never seen done anywhere, and nobody is doing it, and it's not certain it can be done, and it needs a power source that hasn't been invented, and it needs this and that doesn't exist, and well, that's a pretty lightweight energy pattern at that point, right? And someone's going to drive that to work? No, they're going to drive a dense energy pattern that everyone's been doing for, hundreds of years. They're going to invest in that dense energy pattern and not give you any money for that, right? It's just too ephemeral, right? And so the lighter the pattern and the smaller the pattern, the more it just gets buffeted around by the heavier, denser, larger patterns. And so in that dynamic, right, it takes a certain amount of courage, a certain amount of vulnerability to leave a large mass, the majority, and go into a minority. But there's a risk associated with that, right? Some families have a clause, basically. If you don't listen to what mom says, you're never welcome in this family again. So it's a big deal, right? Well, Christianity has one of those, little, discouragement clauses. If you don't do this, you'll go to hell and you'll be tormented by God, tormented, for the end of time, right? And you're a bad person, by the way, and and all that, right? So, so as a 13-year-old, looking at that dynamic, we're just going to pause and blow nose. As a 13-year-old, looking at that dynamic, I'm going from the whole country thinks, or the whole world kind of seems to be largely, at least pretending to be Christian. And Christianity does not have room for channeled entities, at least in the most of it, right? You can walk into Christian churches around the world and say, I got a cassette from a channeled entity. What does Christianity have to say about this? You think it's a good idea, or shall I keep listening to you guys, right? Well, it's pretty obvious where that comes in. And so, I had to face at 13 the awareness that if I was wrong, I would probably be burned alive for eternity. But if I was right, I would have an interesting person to listen to, right? Because it wasn't going the other way, right? And that's, if you're competing for the reptilian brain, you have to have a better fear on the other side, right? And so you've got to compete for the reptilian brain. You got to do that with fear. So, if you don't become a Christian and do this, you'll be burned alive for eternity. Well, if you don't become a Muslim and this and that, then you'll be smote down and stuff. So, it kind of balances out. But Lazaris isn't offering a threat, like if you become a Christian, you'll be. So the asymmetry of risk is higher from a fear point of view. Lazaris is just saying we have some interesting things to say. They're saying you'll be burned alive for eternity, right? So that makes it, it's an asymmetrical risk in that sense. And the way that I got through that was through realizing that I didn't respect or admire a God that would burn people alive for eternity. I didn't respect and admire that. Not only did I not respect and admire that, but I despised that. Meaning, that's really, your main protocol. Do what I say, or I will torture you for all time. I mean, that's not God. That's demonic, right? That's sick. That's worse than my dad, right? That's pretty fucked up, right? If you were going to imagine the worst sociopath, it probably would be someone that says, do exactly what I say, and you have to guess because I'm not talking, right? I'm going to grunt for 2,000 years. I'm not going to say anything. But that was wrong. Burn for eternity. You'd have to get pretty, it'd be hard to come up with a worst sociopathic bully, right, than that definition of God. And so kind of the way I worked with it was, well, there may be a God that does that, but that's really just a very powerful, sick bully. And do I really want to live my entire life worried about what a sick, powerful, sociopathic bully is going to do if I have my own thoughts? And I thought, no, I would, at least until I'm physically being burned, at which point I imagine I would change my mind. But at least in theory, I would rather, stand up to that kind of a bully. And if I could bear it, put up with that rather than give my respect to a bully pretending to be a deity. And so that was kind of the way through that particular thing. But there is a moment of walking off the path towards channeled entities. Even the name entity, it doesn't have a very good review within the pop culture. And so regardless whether you're an atheist or a Christian or whatever, entities are viewed with, I would say, disbelief, scorn, impatience, humiliation, laughter, etc. So I would say that was more the point of shame, in the sense that as an empath, as someone that cares about others and wants to be cared for, the view of the majority matters, right? Because statistically, that's where the odds are, right? If you're dating in a sect with 10 members, it's not good, right? The odds are not good. If you're dating within the Buddhist community, you've got some millions to choose from. If you're dating within the Christian community, you've got billions to choose from. If you're dating within, Islam, you've got options. So, if you've got 1 billion people to choose from, you've got pretty good odds that one of them will be able to put up with your shortcomings, and you'll be able to put up with their shortcomings, and you could, move beyond that to enjoy the positives. But it's not good in a sect of one. And so, that also, there is a sense of shame, like the ego, the I, identifies with a pattern. Of course, there has never been an ego that didn't think that its pattern was right? There's never been a cult in human history that says, we believe this, we do this, we think this, we feel this is our whole way of doing it, and it's utter nonsense. Nobody should do it. The whole cult should be disbanded. Now, every cult in human history, 95% of which are now extinct, they all believe that they're right. That's one of the things that helps confirm that they are in fact a cult. They think that they're right, meaning they think their pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is better than all the other patterns, and they think that in a certain kind of an insane loop that says we're better because we're better, right? We do this because it's the best way, and we know it's the best way because it's the way we used to do things. And that's why we're doing it, because it is the best way, and that's how we know it's the best way. It's our way, right? So that kind of logic, right, is pretty cult-like. It's pretty repetitious. And it's also obviously flawed. You know, if you think of the 10,000 languages, the 10,000 cultures in human history, all of them thinking they were right, you know, and then you think of identity, the I that identifies with its a little microcult that says, my belief is the best belief to have, right? And this thought that I'm thinking, that's the thought to have, right? So I'm right, right? So anyone with a different thought is obviously wrong. Anyone who sees things different, I mean, poor fools, you know, they haven't gotten it. They eventually, I'm sure they'll all come around. But, you know, for now, I'm surrounded by fools, right? You know, and if I think that I'm foolish, then I think I'm right about that too, right? You think I'm smart? No, you fool. I'm a fool. You must be dumb like me. You think I'm smart, right? You're wrong. I'm a fool, right? So even those egos, they're sure that they're right? I'm a fool. I'm worthless. No, you're not. You're not worthless. Yes, I am. The ego knows that it's right? Even if the other is more attractive, that's not the basis for identity. Identity is a pattern. I think this way because I thought this way yesterday, and I thought this way yesterday because I had this feeling, and I had this feeling because it was this story, this thought, and it's just been going on for a long time, and that's who I am, right? Well, how about you are a happy, loving, beautiful person? No, I'm not. I'm a selfish, horrible, greedy person. You want to hang on to that? Yeah, that's me. That's my pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And anyone who thinks I'm a great person, they're full of shit. I know best. The ego always knows best. Every cult knows that its way of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is the best way. And, or it's the right way. You know, I don't like being me, but it's who I am. And nobody's going to argue me out of it, right? That's the way it is. So this is, you know, this is part of the, you know, the ego and cult's dynamic. And so whenever you diverge, right, from that, there's a sense of individuation, right? I'm now different from my mom. I'm now different from dad. I'm now different from my siblings. And in each of these things, the infant, the inner child, the regressed, traumatized one is vulnerable. It's also useful to understand that the more undigested trauma, the more we dissociated at key peak traumatic events in infancy and childhood, or even in the womb, the more the dissociation occurs, the more that age stays frozen at that age in that traumatic state, right? And so, you know, just being different, having a different skin color, a different nose, can be a traumatic event to someone who is experiencing the world largely through the eyes of a 2-year-old. That is, perceiving that being different results in sociopathic betrayal, lies, wars, etc. So, in my sense, there was, you know, a certain amount of protection in that my father introduced me to Lazaris. And I was spending some time at the Findhorn community in Scotland, which was pro-spirit and alternative and channeled entity. And so in that sense, right, my majority in my family and, you know, the adults around there, they were supportive of this, meaning there wasn't, in addition to the country and the larger culture, all of the people around me telling me that I was wrong, Now, when I chose to homeschool myself at the age of 14, I did have that experience. Every single party around me were all saying that I was doing the wrong thing. And so that was, in some ways, had more anxiety around it. I had to look at it and say, these people could be right. They're all in agreement. Right? They all think it's the wrong thing to do. And it turned out to be one of the best decisions I've made in my life, right? Which kind of ties into one of the things that I would later hear Lazaris say, which is that in the history of humanity, the majority has never been correct, right? Which you can unpack if you overlay the bell curve on best practices or innovation. Then that statement starts you start seeing the certainty of that statement, as opposed to just, what does that mean? Well, what do you mean? The majority has always been wrong. You saying that everyone says that this is red, and this one person says that red is green because they're colorblind, and the majority is always wrong, right? No, that's a confusing aspect of Lazaris not unpacking that. But if you look at the bell curve of innovation and best practices, the majority is always wrong, right? Because the minority is the one that is innovating. The best practice of the day is being born, being shaped, being written, being coded with a distinct minority. And it's going to take a period of time for that to work its way into the bell curve of adoption and innovation into the position of the majority. So in terms of a best practice, the majority is always wrong. But in terms of, if you ask 1,000 people, is this the color green? And they all say yes in that instance. And one person says, no, it's red. Well, in that case, the majority is correct, right? So you have to actually unpack that, and most things, if they're said too simplistically, and I think Lazaris did say that simplistically, to say that in the history of humanity, the majority has never been correct. Simplistic statements like that, you can move both ways on. You can find a whole slice or a paradigm where that's correct, and you have to figure out how and why, or you can find a whole area where clearly incorrect, right, and how and why, and you've got to sort that through. However, I would say that there was some kind of exposure to shame in the awareness that, for example, I was listening to BBC comedy at the time, Monty Python and the like. It was popular, at that point, and being played on BBC along with other things, and Lazaris channeling alternatives, etc. would you'd have an entire audience guffawing at the stupidity of something like that, the smugness, the superiority, etc. And so by associating with that, by putting weight on it, by investing some of my identity, in the Lazaris material, then all those people are laughing at me, all those at me, at the I that's identified with that, right? So I was identified with Christianity. Now I'm identified with Lazaris, and my I is now getting a little ding of dismissal, of dissociation, of patronizing disgust for superstition and the like, because of that dynamic with Lazaris. And I think that that's an important thing to be aware of, because to the degree that we are traumatized at young ages, dealing with undigested trauma, like there's a part of me that's 6 years old, that's always been 6 years old, that no matter, how many thousand meditations I do with Lazaris, is a traumatized 6-year-old. And Lazaris has never touched that trauma, which then becomes another source of shame, right? So the first source of shame is that the traumatized 6-year-old feels terrified because he is not secure enough. My traumatized 6-year-old cannot survive, is not secure in their survival, and has a very low level of love and belonging and a low level of self-esteem, right? And that's a reflection of a frozen set of traumatic events in a dissociated culture where to go through the intensity of emoting and somatic stuff feels traumatizing in itself, right? Our cult has a way of bringing up intense events and partitioning them, and then saying that the intense emotion required to unfreeze the partition, to melt the dissociation, is taboo. You don't talk about that event again. You don't bring it up. And you certainly don't rage or scream or shout or act out as if somehow, what? When you were 6 years old, you're still on with that? There's so much patronizing shame, disdain for the process necessary to reintegrate these parts, that the question is, if you're dealing with a traumatized 6-year-old inside, and you're at the emotional age, as you get near that trauma, you re-identify, because the ego attaches to the loudest pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, and says, that's me. And the loudest pattern in a human lifetime is trauma, right? The thoughts, the feelings, the sensations that we experienced while being traumatized are the most solid, dependable, repeatable identities or dentities that we can attach to, right? And so that's me. That's me. I am an incest survivor. That feels very, very strong because it has such intense feelings about it. Now you'd say, well, why aren't you a breather? Well, it just doesn't feel very strong, does it? It's nothing, right? Well, you've been doing that millions of times, right? Why do you say you're an incest survivor? Because 3 relatives had sex with you one time, years ago. What? But you're breathing every single day. Why aren't you a breather? Well, the ego likes to attach itself to something that has a very strong charge, because the ego wants to know who it is. The ego is ultimately in a terrified relationship with the unknown. And what's protecting it from the unknown and death is attaching itself to a very strong pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And the strongest patterns tend to be fear-based patterns, which tend to be, and the highest fear is the traumatic event. And so as we get close to a traumatic event, the ego usually stops identifying with the reasonable outer day world and re-identifies with the younger age that's reliving the traumatic event, right? And so then the ego says, that's me, and then now you're looking at the world at 6 years old, and it feels terrifying because a 6-year-old cannot meet their own needs, right? And then in that dynamic, everyone laughing at me is a devastating event. I don't belong. Nobody values me. Nobody respects me. No one sees me. They're laughing at me. They're dissociating from me. They're enjoying my shame. The fact that I don't fit in. They're disowning me. They're casting me out so that they can deride me, throw me off the horse, right? But I can't survive off the horse, right? And they're enjoying my terror. They'll let me come in at a low rank as a dependent to be scoffed at, right? But because of this humiliating event, I don't have rank, right? And then I'm frozen into the cult, into the group, as a scapegoat. As your role is basically to remind us that we're not like you by disowning our shadow side. And your role is to carry all that pain and shame. That's your role from now on. That's the only way we're going to let you back on the horse. Otherwise, we'll deride you. We'll disdain you. We'll disown you. We'll laugh at you. We'll enjoy your suffering. You fell over. Ha! What a hilarious thing. Hilarious. You fell over. You're dirty. You're angry. Hilarious, right? So that protocol, right, is of course further shaming, humiliating. The ego's trying to have a sense of importance, of value. But it has to cling to the strongest patterns, right? And so if the ego clings to being important while every single person smirks, knocks their ice cream out, pushes them over in the mud, the ego loses its confidence in the identity. It says, I can't hold on to this identity as a joke. I've got to identify with something solid, like an enraged victim, right? That's a very solid identity. I can hold the rage. The more they punch me, the more rage I feel. That's strong. The more they abuse a smaller person, the more of a victim I am. That's strong. I am a victim. Now it's a new identity. That one's solid, right? That's a solid identity. Well, the ego doesn't like to let go of solid things because it confronts death in the process of letting go of solid things, right? My ego doesn't like blowing my nose in the middle of this because it weakens the identity, right? It weakens the illusion of control, right? Mucus just comes when it comes, right? That weakens, there's a certain embarrassment, meaning an awareness of helplessness, of not being in control. You know, my nose gets allergies this time of year, whether I, the ego, want it to or not. There's a certain sense of like, am I going to be judged? I'm not enjoying life. Good egos are supposed to be positive and enjoying all that stuff, all that programming, right? And then it interrupts the pattern, right? It seemed so confident, and there was, you know, this was all going along, and then what? That was part of the plan. You don't do that. That's not what a competent person does, right? So it kind of shakes a little bit of the identity, right? Right. And if too many of those things go on, and then the audience flips, the outside flips and starts viewing you like, oh yeah, you try things and you fail, right? Then the ego feels very, very frightened of the unknown, etc., and then may identify, hold on to, now I'm really a failure in disguise. That's my real identity. I'm a failure in disguise. Like, I've got to see, will anyone notice, right? And then the ego can hold to that, but it can't really win from that perspective. It doesn't have a lot of leverage to do the things of a confident winner from that identity, which is where it becomes self-referential. And then you don't win a lot, and then other people look at you that way as well, right? Now you're locked in identity, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, and you've got everyone else doing that with you, right? Which is why, you know, fake it till you make it, and, you know, look cool and do this, and no, I don't fart. Right? I don't go to the bathroom. I never lose control, right? Because then other egos are impressed that identity seems solid, right? I can't find a hole. Like, egos are always trying to strengthen their identity, their pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, by shaking other people's patterns, right? And saying, I've got the best one, right? Because they're all different. Every pattern is a little different, right? And so, you know, how's that supposed to be, right? How's that all supposed to fit together if we all have different identities that we I about? So, you know, so that's, I would say that I would say that in the first waves of shame with Lazaris were, I'm smaller than my dad. My dad isn't treating me very well. I can't do anything about it. And that shaming this powerful identity that Lazaris is describing, right? So Lazaris is saying, you create it all. I'm obviously not doing a very good job of that. Plus, I don't know what he's talking about. What do you mean I'm creating it all, right? I just asked for a scoop of strawberry ice cream. Dad said, not today, you didn't do this and this, and then I felt embarrassed and this. What do you mean I'm creating that, right? So, and then, so the shame, the shame comes in layers, right? So let's say I relatively successfully transcended the Christian shame with Lazaris by, well, it can't even, can we write? Yeah, so let's just say I relatively stably got over that one just by recategorizing God as a devil, right? That's a pretty jerky thing to do. And so I just reframed it as, am I afraid of being punished by God, to am I afraid that a big jerk bully is at the top of the entire universe, and that that is definitely the thing that a jerk would do, burn people alive for not agreeing to them. But do I want to pay homage to a jerk? Like, are these people really so noble because they pray to a jerk? Then it starts to be like, yeah, of course they're scared of a big bully. I'm scared of a big bully as well, but, let's not pretend that being scared of a bully is all that noble, and let's not pretend that happening to be the biggest asshole around is all that great, right? So I would say that's getting over. But then we have the shame of being laughed at and feared by people, right? Oh, that's Luciferic, that's this, that's that, right? So within the anthroposophical community that I belong to, Lazaris fits in within that paradigm. You have Christ, Ahriman, and Lucifer representing the two poles on the side of Christ. So Lazaris is towards the light, towards the Luciferic direction. Now, this had more weight than the fundamentalist Christian thing because my parents believe it. Right? That's their thing. They're more into anthroposophy than they are into Lazaris. Right? So they all think this is a really big deal. And that is an important question to know. Is Lazaris Luciferic or Ahrimanic or, whatever. And so there's more of a fear because that's then at that age putting me potentially at odds with everyone, not just, the larger, the larger group. So that's, that remains. Like, I can feel it in my body right now. The anxiety, the dread, the fear around deviating from all the people around me and being completely alone, right? So that's a little bit harder. Then there's the humiliation of being laughed at for believing in spirits and alternatives, and the endless jokes about hippies and yoga people and these crystals. That whole thing gets thrown into there where of course they like crystals, they sit there, they chant, they can't hold down a job, they don't do this, they're ridiculous, right? And so there you have the atheists piled on, you have the scientists piling on, right? You can't prove that that's the best thing, whatever. So then there's that. Then there's the schizophrenia shame. So Dad recommends, or is at least listening to a tape on Lazaris, open mind to it. Lazaris is saying that I create my own reality. And so that gets thrown at me, right? So Dad says, oh, why did you create me doing that? You're listening to Lazaris. Why did you create me doing that, right? I don't think that, that was too much effort for Mom to kind of work out that logic and stuff, so she just kind of brushed things off. But those things continue. The shame of the parents continues. And there's a new identity there's an I that's trying to attach to some of the things Lazaris is saying. So Lazaris is saying, you created all. So there's an I trying to say, first of all, it's difficult to know what to do with anomalous data. Now, this is an important just general paradigm to understand, that within all beliefs, whatever they are, there is anomalous data. And a good way of seeing that is actually like this. You can think of a thought system as being a system. Now, all systems are refracting the one, the unconscious, into a level of complexity. And so this would be a 5-point system. So it's well designed, right? There's 5 points. It's not just good or evil. It's not just black and white. So it's got some complexity to it. And it's symmetrically laid out, so it's not imbalanced, right? It's a bumpy ride, putting, 5-pointed stars or pentagrams onto your car. It's a bumpy ride. It's not a circle. We have fallen from grace into the illusion of language, which gives birth to systems. But thoughts and beliefs, words, they're all systems, and so they're all a vastly simplified version of reality. So there's the descent into that, but every system, like this one is not too bad. You look at it, all of this data can be accounted for within this system, right? But what about this data? What about that? What about that? See, it's outside the box. The box is nicer than a square box. It's a 5-sided box, but it's still outside the box. And the reality is, the dirty secret in any scientific system or any other thing is there is always something that doesn't fit in the box, right? It's always something. It doesn't fit in the box. Every system, first of all, and this has even been demonstrated, by some top thinkers and scientists, every system relies on certain assumptions that cannot be proved within the system. So you have to start with a miracle. Like in Descartes' case, with Cartesian logic, in Descartes' case, an angel visits Descartes, shows him a vision and says, "Go forth, René, and create the world, explore the world with measurements and numbers." With measurements and numbers, right? And so Cartesian logic is born. But the angel doesn't show up in Cartesian logic, meaning the whole basis of the system is an act of faith in angels that you can't be measured and don't have a clear number. But it's the same with anything. Like evolution works if you give the miracle of the Big Bang. What? Out of nowhere? Poof? Right? Puff, the magic dragon, and the Big Bang happens and all life comes from that? Well, see, everything makes sense in the evolutionary trajectory of the Big Bang paradigm, except the Big Bang. Why did it come at this time? I don't know. Who did it? We don't know. Why did that? We don't know. Right? It's all a big miracle. Right? But once the miracle happens, that's the basic founding assumption, then the rest makes sense, right? And so all systems have this characteristic. No matter what it is, Every one of Lazaris' systems has this characteristic. If it can be put into numbers and words, it is a system. And it's resting on the foundation of the system of numbers and words, right? If you take all of the words in the English language, according to, I think this is one of the better or biggest, and I'm told that this is currently the book, right? So this is the system of communicating in the English language, right? So we have all these different words, and they all relate to each other, right? You can't, let's say, Bulawayo. I have no idea what that means. It's nonsense until we start applying the other words. Bulawayo, an individual city in Western Zimbabwe. So we're even in places. They've even got places in here. People, facts, right? But this is clearly, a system. There are things that exist that there is no word for. What about the sweet sadness after something you thought was tragic happens, and you're in nature and you let it go and you feel connected to something bigger than yourself? You weren't expecting it, and it feels more beautiful than anything you've ever felt. What about that sweet sadness? There's no word for that. It's outside the box, right? You can try and get there through all those little words, right? You can maybe get there, but the words all mean little different things to different people, right? So anything that's built on the system of language is flawed because there's all the spaces in between words that are bigger than the words, right? Finger, right? That's easy. That's tiny. But what about the infinite space in between these two? You cut it in half, you cut it in half, you cut it. It just keeps getting infinite, right? You can cut the space in between these two fingers in half 1 trillion times, and then you can still take that space and cut it in half, right? And that's infinite, right? But these two little points, finger, right? Index finger, middle finger, those are tiny, right? And the system is always tinier than the reality, right? And so in this box, this is a much better system than most systems out there because it's symmetrical and it's got 5 distinctions. And most systems are black and white because you don't have to think so hard. But every system has anomalous data, right? And the only way that you can maintain the integrity of a system when that data is presented is to disown it, is to discount it, is to ignore it, right? The Holy Lord Jesus has bestowed his magnanimous presence on this preacher, who as a representative of God is doing this and doing that. Now, if you go out in the break and you see the person smoking and groping one of the nuns, you say, what about this? And everyone shushes you up. Shh, shh, shh. Get away. Don't ruin the system, right? You're saying we should all smoke and grope nuns and keep it a secret? And then everyone should cover it up? Or should shh, 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 right? And a system will attack anomalous data with its very survival, right? With fight, flight, and freeze. In other words, when a system fears collapse of its structure, there are a bunch of eyes that identify with that system and will fight for dear life, right? So that's why you have the schizophrenia of more wars being or more murder being done by the Catholic Church than by probably any other entity in the last few thousand years. So more murder And then you say, but your whole system is don't kill. Yes, but we need to defend the system of don't kill by killing all the people that don't fit into the system, right? And if these people are, happy, if these people are healthier and happier using their system of indigenous beliefs, it's ruining it, because God said he was going to punish everyone who didn't do what we said. But look at all those happy people having sex on the beach, going around, parents aren't abusing their children, happy. We've got to kill them because they're a threat to the identity that we are we're attached to, right? There's all these eyes that say, I am a priest, I am a Catholic, I am this. And there's all these people ruining it by being happy not being Catholics. It's incredibly upsetting, right? If I had one of those moments with my crew the other day. I was trying to tell my crew that they're fools for fighting education. Not high school, but learning to do their jobs well enough that they can get a raise or start their own business, right? They have no interest in this. Come on. If you're going to fight for something, fight something else. Don't fight the one thing that's going to give you empowerment. So you're fools. You've got to learn this, right? Well, one of my employees went without doing any studying, but he's just a really good smooth talker, right? And so he's started his own business and is making more money, and he's just piggybacking on his charm, and his clients are not competent enough to know how good or bad his skills are, which is one of the big problems in competence, is only a really competent person knows who is and isn't competent. The rest of us, we just, they seem presidential, right? They've got a nice hairdo, right? They've got the blue emblem. And are they doing anything good for the country? I don't know, because I don't know how to run a country. Right? So I think the best thing is to just vote for people who say that they're the best at running the country, right? And you wonder why Trump goes around saying that he's the greatest veteran, never gone to a war, just the greatest veteran, he's the greatest this, he's the biggest. Well, because the majority of people do not know, and do not know that they do not know, and they cannot assess competence in a terrain they themselves are incompetent, and obviously a majority of Americans do not have the competence to be terribly good presidents and face the circumstances that one does in office and face the pressures that one deals with. You get into office and you have millions of people all wanting things to stay the same. And those are the people in power. And so you try and save money for the government. Well, that's firing incompetent people, right? Well, they don't want to vote for you. Then they organize in a democracy. And so it's a challenging thing, right? And so here's someone that comes along and says that they're the best at everything and just ignores the data. Even that's even better, isn't it? We don't even have to look at data and think, right? We just... Right? And so obviously that's an effective style of, I wouldn't call it leadership, but it's an effective style at gaining power within a democracy is just say that you're the best at everything and ignore all the facts and say that everything else is a lie and just keep doing that, right? And that is comfortable, right? So every system has anomalous data, right? Including the Lazaris system, including the concept synergy system, including, the American cult, including each of our families, including each one of our identities. Every one of our identities, our patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, has massive amounts of data on the outside of it that says you should change that, right? But the ego says, to what? To what? I have relative confidence in this dentity. This dentity has kept me alive. You look around, I'm still alive. This dentity has kept me housed. There's my house, right? This dentity has seen me avoid accidents on the road. Yeah, I haven't been in an accident this month, so it's doing okay, right? And there's a lot worse dentities out there, says the I. Right? And I don't know which ones are which, right? Because I'm not competent, right? So we all defend our identity, which is our system of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And how we do it is we ignore the anomalous data, right? We ignore the anomalous data. We bribe the anomalous data. Don't tell anyone, please. Here, don't tell your father. Don't tell your father this. Here, go do this, right? We bribe, we ignore, we lie. No, never seen that person. What? They're wearing my underwear? Never seen them. No, I don't know. How do they get? They probably there must be millions of stores selling that underwear and this and that and the other, right? So we lie, we deny. We change the subject, we pull rank, we punish people for bringing up the anomalous data, we block them out, get them out, silence them, pull the mic, cut them out, right? Get them out of the forum. No more, no. We do not want any data that goes counter to the narrative, right? Someone might say something bad about Lazaris, get quick. Get him to sign something, never to say anything about Lazaris without our control, our permission, right? So all systems, all I's, all egos, desperately protect their own pattern. And all patterns are wrong. They're all flawed, they're all incomplete. They all have stunning counterpoints, right? You say that you can take someone to a nice Christian soup kitchen, right? And you say, see how we help the needy, we do this, right? It looks good, right? Let's be a Christian, right? But then someone brings up, well, let's go to where they're selling forgiveness and confession to the mob if the payout is enough. I'm not so sure that's a good one. Then let's go to the 5% pedophilic Catholic priests. Definitely, let's not go there, right? And then let's go to the Vatican, the Vatican system of reward that makes someone a cardinal for successfully covering up the sexual abuse for so long and writing the protocols of shuffling priests around so that nobody knows that that person is a pedophile. Right, in their spare time, obviously, when in between services and all that, then then they have their spare time, and so that's right. So that's right. Every system has this. Right? This is what I should be doing. I should have discipline. And it says, so why do I feel so depressed? Right? I don't know, but you don't want to go back to that chaos where you don't know who you are. You don't want to just throw everything up for grabs and quit working and stuff because you're depressed for one day. Just push through it. Just ignore the depression. Maybe it'll leave. Just believe in the system. Believe in the system. Do the routine. Do it again. It got you through before. It'll get you through again. And we also know that in the technological adoption curve, all thought is a technology. We also know that it's all wrong and destined to be proven wrong. Right? Only a fool can look at the statistics, right? Just the ones we're admitting so far, because we're still blocking out Atlantis in most of our consensus archaeology and anthropology. We've blocked out Atlantis, we've blocked out, the Lemuria, we've blocked out anything basically older than 5 or 6 years. Or 5,000 or 6,000 years. So those seemingly sophisticated cultures around Göbekli Tepe, they don't like that. And they're coming up with their rewrites and stuff. So we've blocked out most of kind of consciousness history on Earth, you know. But even the little bit that we've let through, our anthropologists will say there have been 10,000 languages with 10,000 belief systems, 10,000 diets, 10,000 routines that were all habiting the Earth. And of course, they all thought they were right and taught their children to do what they're doing. And 95% of those are dead. And if we expand the horizon a little bit, we could say that 99% of everything any cult has ever believed is now extinct. The ones that believed the world was founded on a turtle, the one that believed that the goddess was a great snake, the one that... Nobody's believing that anymore, right? So those thoughts, those identities that lots of eyes were holding on to for dear life, they're now extinct, right? And we absolutely know that we're going to die, and so our ego, as it is currently defined, is going to be extinct, right? So we absolutely can be guaranteed that 1 trillion years from now, every single thing we're talking about, including all that Lazaris has said, and the English language, is all hooey, right? Meaningless. It's so irrelevant, even a few million years from now, let alone a billion, let alone 1 trillion years from now. What? You're going to go back and listen to what this channeled entity said, this and that and the other, that didn't... It's nonsense, right? And everything I'm saying here, bullshit. Complete, utter bullshit. Right? It's still got some relevance now, right? Because we haven't come up with something vastly better. But back to anomalous data and layers of shame, right? There's an interesting thing with dentities, right? The more you invest in them, the more attached you are, right? You're going to look at something and say, well, that's interesting. Okay. But if you spend $70,000 to buy it, if you start talking about it, if all your friends start talking about it, it becomes significant. Because otherwise, why are you doing that, right? And the same is true with any teacher-friend relationship, right? If you start buying Lazaris tapes, listening to Lazaris tapes, spending time, spending money, spending attention in the direction of Lazaris, it becomes more significant. And the more significant it becomes, the more the I needs to come up with reasons that it is the right thing to do, right? Because it's a very weak identity for the I to say, you know, I spend lots of time every week, lots of money, lots of attention, thinking about absolute garbage. This dumb channeled entity, Lazaris, I can't even pronounce it. Anyway, I spend all my time and money, and it's complete and utter nonsense. I am a fool. Makes no sense at all, right? No, what the ego does, the more time, money, and attention we spend in any direction, is it says, first of all, I'm smarter than average, right? 90% of egos think that they're whatever it is, better than average. They're worse than average, they're smarter than average, they're healthier than average. So that's just a statistic, right? So 90% of all egos think they are more something than average. And so obviously that's wrong, right? So you know there's 90% of those egos are all lying, right? But usually, if you're into personal growth, whatever, usually you think you're better than the people who aren't into personal growth, clearly, right? It's not like I'm so unevolved, I'm listening to channeled entities rather than praying to Jesus, right? No. I'm more sophisticated. I'm better than average, right? And so, I'm not wasting all this time and money. No, this is important, right? Now, the more important it is, the more we identify with it. The more we do it, say it, think it, feel it, spend money on it, spend time with it, the more we identify with it and say, I am a Lazaris what? well, in the code, you're supposed to say friend, but student or whatever is really the protocol, because you don't pay your friends and you don't listen to monologues from your friends and have very little to say, right? And so you don't pay friends, you don't, so friend it's a shaky thing. So you're my friend, but you're the only paid friend other than the prostitutes that I visit, and they don't say they're friends, they say they're prostitutes, right? So you have a shaky thing where Lazaris is the only friend who's not physical, the only friend that you pay, the only friend that you have a relationship by cassette, right? So this is a shaky concept, like friend, look it up in the dictionary, this and that. Now, Lazaris is using it in a very unique way, right? And so this looks like a student, a business, whatever, but it's a friend, right? So that creates a little bit of shakiness, right? And that shakiness, to all the people that don't want to have to think about all this, that's another reason to dismiss it. But there's also the anomalous data, right? The anomalous data. So so Lazaris and the Lazaris protocols are filled, like every other system, with anomalous data. So let's look at it, right? Let's just look at some of the anomalous data that doesn't fit into the Lazaris system, that's outside the box. Well, workshops and material on longevity and immortality. Not a single Lazaris friend not getting old. Have you ever met one? Have you ever seen anyone at any Lazaris event or on any tape that doesn't seem to be aging with the rest of the population? Right? Don't look at me, right? No. So that's called anomalous data. Anyone could live, you created all, anyone can live forever, but not even one, right? Not even one. So that's anomalous data. So then you have, right, it's easier to succeed than it is to fail, right? So anyone starting out their relationship, with Lazaris, trying to, have depressing lives of mediocrity and disappointment and this and that and the other. Is anyone trying to do that, right? Is that why you bought your first Lazaris book? No, of course not. No, you wanted a better world, right? And Lazaris says it's easier to succeed than it is to fail, which, if that's the case, like if you look at statistics, like if you look at water, just look at water. If you make it lower in this area of the lake, the water all runs out that way. Like water does actually follow that, right? Water goes wherever it's easiest, right? And people generally do too, right? People generally do too. They're driving and they have a fork in the road and they both end up in the same city, and one road has 5 lanes and no traffic and the other road has lots of traffic. People take the easier route, right? So what do you mean it's easier to succeed than it is to fail, but the vast majority of people are not succeeding? Well, those are just the consensus, right? They haven't learned the Lazaris techniques now that. No, the majority of Lazaris friends, regardless of how many decades they've been working with, are also having a harder time succeeding than failing, right? And fail many times in many areas, right? So is there anyone who's just one person in the whole Lazaris community who's just always succeeding because it's easier and they're just not fighting it, right? Well, where are they? Where are they, right? Well, surely Penny and Jach, right? Really? Enrique, surely anyone. And the staff around Concept Synergy basking in the law of resonance. The law of resonance, we're not coming down to your level, you're coming up to our level, we're not moving, right? So anyone just lift up to Lazaris' resonance and no, right? Penny dealing with shame and medical issues and dying early and Michael's suicide and Jack's martyrhood and difficulty running a company and frustrations in all the concept synergy, employee-staff relationships. This not working, that work, So none of them get it? None of them? Right? So this is the anomalous data, right? Or what about Lazaris's medical predictions that turn out to be completely wrong? Like, it doesn't seem like you have cancer. You get a biopsy the next day and riddled with cancer. That all happened like that overnight, Lazaris? Well, why doesn't it just unhappen overnight? Right? So what's going on there, right? Or what about all the people that like and are drawn to success and they've stopped working with Lazaris but have gone on to work with other people and been successful in with those relationships? What about that data, right? So there is a ton of anomalous data around concept synergy and around Lazaris. But in my younger age, I didn't know a lot about this data. It's one of the reasons that I make this is I would have had both a difficult time with this as a teenager exploring my relationship with Lazaris. I would have a difficult time with watching these videos, and I would have an easier time, right? Because it would help me feel less crazy at times, right? Now, we elevate rationality in our cult, right? And so even the metaphysics and the metaphysicians and all that place a certain amount on rationality, not always honestly. Like there's this tremendous focus on this serendipitous event, but there isn't you turned left when you wanted to go left to pass that car, right? Cause and effect. You said, I want to pass that car. You turned left. Amazingly, the wheels turned left. You pulled into the other lane. You passed the car. Then you turned right and you went back in the lane, right? Cause and effect, right? It was so incredible. Again and again, right? I wanted to go to the Lazaris event, so I found the key, linear, picked it up from the past, the car I bought last year, walked to the car, turned it in. It's amazing. The door opened up like it always does from the past, right? Stuck it in the ignition because I wanted the car to start. Backed up, linear causation, thousands of explosions, cause and effect, combustion, the whole thing. I got to the Lazaris event where I could talk about the serendipity that I haven't really noticed, right? So that's a pretty big, right? Pretty big anomaly, right? Let's talk about serendipity and there being the end of time, but we have to be back at the break or they won't let us in. I thought it was the end of time. No. It's the theoretical end of time, but we're still locking you out of the meditation. It's an illusion? Yes, but you still wasted your money on the event, right? Because we're not going to let you in, right? So what about all that, right? And so these things start, they're obvious to other people because they haven't invested in the time, the money, the attention, the thought. They say, well, of course there's time. Of course there's space. Of course there's cause and effect. Of course there's a past. What were you thinking? You heard it on a channeled entity tape. Really? And you believed it, right? Right? Are they giving away, so it's easier to have money? Why aren't they? Go ask Concept Synergy for some money if it's such an illusion, and they ought to have lots of it by now. They won't give you any money. And they won't let you start the workshop in the time you want. So it seems like there is time, there is space, there is money, there is reality. And what are you, a sucker for punishment? Are you just paying people to spout nonsense when the current narrative makes a lot more sense, has a lot more correlation? It's a more useful pattern. Even Lazaris says, all beliefs are false, so pick the ones that work. Time works. This works, that works, right? It's easier to succeed than How is that working? Right? Show me concept synergy, right? Let's have excellent service for once. Like, show me. Well, we have this and that and the other. The past is over, but we still have our payoffs and this and that. It's a weak model of reality relating to a tremendous amount in terms of, in the case of the Lazaris material, if you extrapolate the seemingly reasonable integrated expectation of what Lazaris is saying with the world around us, you could say that most of the data is anomalous, right? Most of the data is anomalous with Lazaris's narrative. Even Lazaris, you start thinking deeply and you say, okay, Lazaris, you have no time. So why isn't there enough time for more of a dialogue in magic time? Wasn't there enough time for everyone to have a magic time? You have a lot of time, but you only give 20 minutes a day for this? Why not make more time if it's so abundant? And then they say, oh, well, within your reality. Okay, why don't you channel to 1,000 channels? Lazaris, channel to 1,000 channels, and because you don't have that many members of friends or clients, then they could all talk 1,000 times more. And it could be more of a dialogue than a monologue, and dialogues are closer to the word friend. Monologue, closer to the word teacher. But you say you're not a teacher, you're a friend, but you monologue, you've got a schizophrenia there, right? You've got a gap, right? Why not be a friend, right? Why not look for volunteers that are not going to charge their friends money and aren't going to channel all the time? Why not do that, right? And why not channel to some women, right? Why not do that, right? Break the stereotype of the greatest ones are all the men. Why not do that, right? What, you don't have enough time? You don't have enough space to do that? You're even a we, and you can't manage 100 channels, right? It doesn't add up, right? But you can't talk about these things, not in the forum, right? You can't talk about pedophilic priests in the Catholic Church, and you can't talk about this stuff in any civilized circle of Lazaris friends. They won't have it. And to a certain extent, it's important to understand this is not, it all feels personal when the hypocrisy and stuff happens with you, but it's important to recognize that this is going on in all cultures, in all cults for human history, and Lazaris is not bucking the trend by doing anything different. They're just, it's the same. It's the same thing. Lazaris has granted a monopoly relationship with Jach and concept synergy, and so if you don't deal with that power structure, you don't have a physical relationship with your friend, with Lazaris, right? Now, people were pointing out these kinds of little things, and I was trying to defend Lazaris as a teenager. I'm depressed, I'm suicidal, but what Lazaris is saying is true, right? I'm being abused by my parents, but what Lazaris is saying is true. And, I can understand the somewhat patronizing, somewhat bored, somewhat irritated reaction of the grown-ups around me. Okay, if you're creating your own reality, why do you have to convince me of this? Just go do it, right? Well, I don't know how to do it. It's easier to succeed than it is to go succeed, right? No, I want to convince you that it's easier to, well, that's not my experience, right? It's not this person's experience, not that person's experience, it's not Jack's experience, it's not Penny's experience, it's not people's experience, right? Be easier to get healthy and live a long life and just grow old gracefully. So what? Penny was doing this as a martyred sacrifice just for our benefit, right? Could have easily listened to Lazaris, but chose not to. Let's not talk about that, right? So these felt humiliating because I would look at it and there'd be a part of me that's saying they're right. And there'd be, obviously they thought they were right, so I just looked a bit dumb, right? When you diverge too much from the pattern of things around, it gets mildly schizophrenic, and that isn't respected, right? Lazaris says, pick respect over adoration. Like if you can be adored or liked or respected, pick respect. Respect is more important than being liked, right? Well, one of the things we respect is coherence in our cult, right? We're doing our scientific theme at the moment, and so we're respecting that. Now, there's other anomalous data. Lazaris says, you chose this lifetime. Well, Lazaris also says, you chose to come to this workshop. So what am I missing here, right? I did choose to come to this workshop. I paid the check. I got in a plane. I did this. I didn't choose this lifetime. What do you mean? You know, you had your meeting. What meeting? You chose your parents for this and that. Your soul did what? Where? Right? Well, come and do a meditation. Okay, I get a sense. There's that image. I can visualize that. But I can also visualize, like the 10,000 other cults, I could visualize a soul as a triangle. I could visualize. People have always believed what they believe, right? So you're saying it's a soul. Another country calls it a pole. Another country says it isn't a soul, it's a subsoul. And the soul is divided into the masculine and feminine. And someone says the soul is a part of you, and others say, no, it's you and you're a part of your soul, right? So people have been making this stuff, these stories up for a very long time. But the one thing that you can be absolutely certain of is I have never remembered, meaning regardless of all the different meditations or psychedelic experiences or creative writing or dreams, I've never once remembered being a me that said, oh, let's go down and do this shit with these parents. In other words, there's a pretty big difference between the me that said, let's go to a Lazaris workshop or let's make this video. See, I'll own this. I'm choosing to make this video rather than watch TV. Yeah, I thought about it. I made this decision. I don't even have a vague memory, let alone agree with or relate with the whole idea of choosing my parents as for this and that, the other reason. All that I have is Lazaris's words to show for it, right? So there's a huge split between this me that I remember and the me that Lazaris keeps talking about as if they are the same. You came to this workshop, you're taking notes, you chose your parents, right? You notice there's a huge gap between those yous, but Lazaris is not bridging that gap with language, right? Lazaris, and so you have, in effect, a schizophrenia. There's these whole series of choices and things that you are making, and then there's these whole things that you're actually choosing and doing that you are making, but they're both called you, right? And Lazaris is adding to the confusion by calling that you rather than calling that your higher consciousness or whatever, right? He just uses you rather than ego you and this you, right? Because that would make sense, right? Lazaris could say that higher conscious you did this and your ego you did this, and you have no way to verify it because no Lazaris friend that I've ever met has remembered those choices Lazaris speaks about as fluently, right? So Lazaris, you chose your parents, you chose a bit of peanut butter, all in the same sentence, right? But it just, that's a pretty big anomaly, right? That's pretty far apart, that you and that you. And so the only thing that we have to go on there is what Lazaris has said. Now, you could say that most cults, most cultures in human history have also believed in some kind of a before life. But then you can also listen to Lazaris say that the majority is always wrong, right? So atheists are actually the minority amongst human cultures. There have been fewer atheistic cultures than any other type of culture, right? So obviously they're right? The majority is always wrong. So there's tons and tons of confusion around this. And again, this stuff cannot be debated critically within the Lazaris cult, right? So it's a cult if you defend your meme, your identity, your pattern against debate, against test. Like you look then like, well, if the hypothesis that Lazaris friends are doing better than the average or anything like that, what is the hypothesis of forming the material? If the hypothesis, like the hypothesis of taking an aspirin, is that more people have less of a headache after the aspirin. That's the hypothesis, and that measures up. There have been lots of studies on aspirins. But if the hypothesis is that by working with the Lazaris material, you'll have a higher quality life, have more longevity, more whatever it is, but the data says, the opposite. No. If you're a Lazaris friend, you're more likely to have this problem. If you're a Lazaris friend, you're the same in this area. If you're a Lazaris friend, you're got more of this. This is better. Maybe you have a better imagination if you're in a Lazaris friend and of doing those meditations for a long time. But you would think that being one of the most effective measuring tools that we know of, right? You would think that if you actually, why do we recommend aspirin to a friend with a headache? Why? Because the statistics support the behavior. Now, would you recommend, patchouli to someone with a headache just because someone selling patchouli wants you to do that? Some, yes, right? But what if all the people with patchouli, some of whom hate the smell, do not get better from their headache, right? Do you care enough to do the test, to actually learn about the statistics, right? And people who really care about human health do care enough to do the test, right? And it's better than superstition. Let's give it to science where science is due, right? Engineering bridges is better than astrology people doing bridges. Would you agree? Would you like your astrologer to build your city's next bridge? Oh, wait. This is not a good time. Mercury is in retrograde. Oh, this is going to be terrible. Do not do no. Just wait on the other side of the bay, for heaven's sake. Don't rush it, right? We're going to wait for the auspicious moment, right? And let's look at your chart. Oh, you are fated to be a good bridge builder. So you're in charge of the steel. Don't ask me where to get it. I haven't ordered steel before. Let's look at the other applicants. I want their charts. You would agree that engineers are going to build a better bridge than astrologers. Are dietitians going to create a better diet than channeled entities? Yes? No? See, we don't know that, do we? Right? So where's the test? Where's, we should see at least some statistical probability. You will overall enjoy, really, what do we all want? We want to have a higher quality of life. Now, Lazaris says, no. Have a nightmare, have a dream, but don't have just an okay life. Don't do it, right? That's the worst. But that's Lazaris's world. how many I's, how many egos, right? And of course, we know that in the Lazaris cult, egos are terrible things, but how many I's would go along with that? Like, you could have a certain okay life. It would be guaranteed to be okay. Or you could flip a coin between miserable and heavenly. What would you choose? Well, I think my ego would go for the medium, right? If that was a toss-up, right? And then you do see there is a fair amount of correlation between wonderful things and horrible things, right? You get famous, how wonderful, and how irritating to be pestered for autographs. You become rich, how wonderful, how irritating to have everything that you do wrong, put up on the screen. So there is a very strong connection between whatever is viewed as wonderful, right? You're highly attractive. Now all these people wanting to have sex with you, and you don't want to have sex with 99% of them, but Lazaris is saying, go with those. Go with nightmare, or really they often do come as a package. Go with nightmare and dream, right? You find the love of your life. Now you're terrified of losing it, right? So you fear of loss goes up with your love, right? So you build this wonderful thing, you climb up, and you have these things tend to be rather circular. You make a lot of money, you lose a lot of money, you have a huge upswing, you have a downswing, or it's tricky, right? My worst moment in life was making it and discovering that did not do anything to resolve the underlying anxiety, loneliness, and terror of a traumatized child, and that I didn't know what to do, right? That was my worst moment, was making it, everyone else saying, gee, what a great life you have, and me feeling I feel worse than I've felt 20 years ago. This is making it? That's terrifying, right? So go up and go down, right, at the same time. Now, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to pick a nightmare? Like, you can have an okay existence or a nightmare. Well, you know where Lazaris is advising you, pick the nightmare. Okay, or nightmare. It's clearly not going that great, right? So you've still got nightmare or mediocrity to choose from. Pick the nightmare, right? Why? Oh, we haven't bothered to explain that, and we don't do dialogues, we do monologues, so you're not going to find out, right? So that's obviously a little bit anomalous. So there are hints around the edges that it's not all that it's cracked up about. But, when I started listening to tapes made in the 80s and 90s, the new age was around the corner. It was just coming up. So, sure, it's all fucked up now. But, the year 2000, after that, you have no idea. Just heavenly. Right? So you can still say, okay, well then, right? Once I listen to all the tapes, once I do all these techniques, once the year 2000, once this, once that, so then it's going to be wonderful. And then in the meantime, the shame is you're obviously not doing it right, right? You had payoffs, you did this, you didn't do that right. Because our techniques work, which means you're not doing it right. Our techniques work. But then there's the next level of shame and humiliation that says, wait a minute. You said that all negativity could be reduced to self-pity and self-importance. What? And after 20 years of going over that and feeling that all my problems were coming from self-pity and self-importance, you change tune? And then you say, no, there's a useful part of self-pity after I already discovered that, right? I discovered pity parties with one of my girlfriends. We had a blast, moaning and complaining, laughing. It was the most hilarious time possible. But I had to get rid of Lazaris to do that, Because Lazaris said that self-pity and self-importance, they're all the root of everything. And I'm like, bullshit, right? I feel relaxed. I'm not stressed. We've had a good laugh. We've had a good bond. We understand each other more. And takes 30 minutes, whatever. We had a great time. Self-pity is 100% wrong. And then Lazaris comes on and says, oh, there is a little benefit to it. Oh, now you tell me, right? After I've had to get rid of you in order to enjoy it. Like, what a fool I feel. Like, when are you going to say that self-importance has a benefit, right? Clearly it does, right? But when are you gonna come out with that one? What, before Jach dies? Oh, by the way, there's also a sliver of benefit to self-importance, right? When are you going to acknowledge that everything in extremes are toxic and in its middle can be healthy, or in its counterbalance to certain situations reduces the toxicity? When are you going to talk about that, right? So there's too many things that, have to wait for Lazaris to catch up with reality. And then Lazaris has gone on and said, oh, if you don't do this technique, whatever, it's because you didn't want it, and that's it, right? That's all. You didn't want it. You went to the causal plane, you didn't want it, that's it. That's it. Oh, it could be shame. Oh, it could be the dark law. Oh, it could be. In other words, all that time I shame myself for not wanting it, it could have been all those other things, which you've finally come around to. And so there's a certain sense that I've been laughed at by people that could easily look at this stuff and say, oh, well, I mean, what do you expect? You're talking to channeled entities. Hello, if that was really the best way, wouldn't more competent people be doing that? Right? But there's a point, right? But no, Lazaris has said he's the highest resonance to ever touch the planet, right? And so it must be true, right? No, he just decided not to tell people that it was a much more complex model of reality until they'd struggled at the old approach for 10 fucking years, right? So that's humiliating, right? That's humiliating, right? It's like, if you're in a marriage, an actual relationship, and, we got to save up, we don't have enough money. And after 10 years of struggling over this, and oh gosh, and then they say, oh, by the way, I've always had a few million in the bank. We didn't really need to do all that. You just weren't ready for it, right? You weren't ready to know that. And so we had to really pinch pennies all that time, right? And so, like, that's not a partnership. That's not a friendship. What is it? What is it? And then saying, well, that's because you weren't ready, right? But we should be adults, right? We should. And so there's also, I think, so there's the shame of the crazy making. You're magician, you created all, you're the thing, but you're not ready. You're not ready for us to tell you the truth from day one, but you're created all, right? So which is it, right? I'm so evolved, I'm not ready? And then this makes no sense. Of course it makes no sense because it doesn't make sense, right? So, and then there's no one to explain this to. Like, you can't go to the neighbor and saying, how's it going? Well, I'm feeling like a real fool. Why? Well, there's this channeled entity I started listening to when I was 13, and he said this and this and this. Well, it turns out, that's not the way it is at all. They're going to go in, our neighbor has been part of a cult. Watch out for him, right? He's 48 years old. He's been believing this stuff. What? It's hilarious. Let's make a joke of it, at dinner, right? So that's a source then. That's a layer of shame. There's a layer of shame that there's no outlet to express the anger, hurt, humiliation, fear about this anywhere at all. If you write to Concept Synergy, they will deflect you, minimize, and push it back in a way that leaves you feeling foolish for having anything to do with them. If you write to Jach, he has no time for intimate friends. And Lazaris, who has no time at all, right, doesn't have time to go into any of this either in 40 years, right? So, or if you do want to go into it, you got to pay us, right? Because that's what friends do, right? So, because I'm not discounting the fact that after my first somewhat uncomfortable session with Lazaris one-on-one, that, in a 30-minute, phone call, some 25 years ago or something like that, I'm not saying that I couldn't have followed up and paid Lazaris to talk about some of these things, but I didn't know a lot of these anomalous data points and have these things to talk about. I just knew that I felt worse at the end of that phone call than otherwise. And there was no time, and it takes 2 years to get on this. I mean, usually the thought comes up, I want to talk about it then with a friend, with an actual friend that says, yeah, that's a good point. Or no, I didn't mean that, I meant this. And we've just bent the word friend to mean something entirely different. So that's a kind of humiliating to say that, like, this is the most, I've spent all this money and all this time, and this is the most luminous teaching, words, whatever, from this high resonance, and they understand reality more than me. It makes no sense. When I found success outside of Lazaris, I felt foolish for the times that I had spent trying to get those same results within the Lazaris paradigm, but wasn't working. I felt like I've been trying all this thing with other Lazaris friends and girlfriends, and all I had to do was this, this, and this. I don't have to work with my endless payoffs. I just have to make clear requests, right? And then I get what I requested because I requested. And I didn't have to do the 7-step thing and the Tipsickery muse. My goodness, what a fool, right? What am I thinking, right? Why isn't Lazaris teaching requests? Because he's so evolved that he doesn't do the things that work. He does the other things that he says works that don't work. What have I done? What is this? Right? So then there's the next wave of shame, which is exclusion from the Lazaris community. So shame is exclusion, like Lazaris, the highest being, the unseen friend, he'll love you to the end of light. But you can't talk to the forum because you said something taboo. Intelligent, but taboo, right? Honest, but can't talk about that in the forum. So cast out of the forum, right? And then Lazaris, Concepts Energy has a hit list of people that security will not let come to a workshop, even if they've paid. If any of these people show up for a workshop, get them out of there, right? Right? Cast out of the workshops. And if you don't sign this thing, you can't even listen to the material anymore, right? Cast out, cast out. And if you bring up this at a party with Lazaris friends, you're not invited to the party again. Right? You try and bring this up with a Lazaris friend, and they say, oh, that's negative ego, you should listen to the tape and this and that, you didn't do it good enough. Critical parent. Right? I thought I actually had the right to have an opinion, an informed opinion of what does and doesn't work based on experience. You're saying to me, Lazaris friend, that I have too many payoffs to let Lazaris technique work, right? But I don't have any payoffs for letting this book work. So the payoffs are specific to Lazaris. Is that what you're saying? Well, I don't have time for this conversation, right? Really? Why don't you try this book then? Because maybe your payoffs, you're not doing very well over there either. Maybe your payoffs are specific to Lazaris. And all you have to do is stop going to Lazaris and then your life improves. What about that? No. I'm sticking with Lazaris. But my life is improving because I'm not working with Lazaris. Well, good luck, right? This is a very odd schizophrenia, right? And will you have friends on the other side of this, right?